Okay, good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's hybrid presentation, which is called Snow Forecasting and Finding Powder Days in the Jemez and Land of Enchantment with Julien Ross. My name is Kristen O'Hara. I'm the Director of Programs here at Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or PEAC as we like to call it, and we are located in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Of course, you already know that if you're in the room with us, but in case you're coming from somewhere else. All right, so if you don't know, PEAC is a nonprofit that operates the Los Alamos Nature Center. Visit our website, peecnature.org, for more details about our programming and what's going on with the Nature Center. I'd like to give a brief and loud shout out to our PEAC, our wonderful PEAC members and donors and volunteers, of course. Thank you for your generous support. If you are interested in becoming a member, donor, or volunteer, please visit peecnature.org to find out more. All right, a few more logistics before we get started. Just going to turn myself a little more. Tonight's talk is a hybrid talk, meaning there are people online and people in the Nature Center with me. For those tuning in on Zoom, please note that you will not be able to see our presenter for tonight's talk. Just see their slides. For questions, our presenter will be taking questions via Zoom chat and from an in-person audience at the end of the presentation. To find the chat feature in Zoom, look for the Zoom app menu bar and type your questions to the PEAC moderator, and I will relay your questions at the end to Julien. For those of you on Zoom, sometimes there will be a delay when we are listening to questions from the live audience. Don't worry, we'll be back in a sec and try our best to remember to repeat the questions for everyone to hear. For some reason, if we do not repeat a question, please gently remind us via chat. After this talk, we will share a short evaluation with everyone, live audience and Zoom audience. Please, please, please take a moment to fill that evaluation out. Your input helps us improve future programs. All right, and now for a bit about tonight's presenter. Julien Ross was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was introduced to skiing at age 7 through the public school subsidized ski program at Ski Santa Fe. It was love at first turn, and Julien has been chasing powder and good mogul lines ever since. Julien grew up fascinated by weather and studied meteorology at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. He's going into his 6th season at the OpenSnow, New Mexico forecaster. I'm going to pass it over to Julien and now monitor the Zoom chat for questions. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the program.
Thank you so much, Kristen and PEAC, for having me. Good evening, everyone here in the room. Welcome, everyone online in the Zoom room. Actually, I did a quick straw poll here in the room. We have about 95% of the folks in the room are local Los Alamos. We have a couple from Santa Fe. Any other towns represented in the room? Albuquerque in the house. And folks on Zoom, if you don't mind throwing in the chat just where you're from, and Kristen will give me the results here in a minute. I'd just love to know, who's here tonight and who we have represented in New Mexico, so I can also be sure to speak to the mountains in your backyard. My name is Julien Ross, and I'm the New Mexico forecaster for OpenSnow. And tonight we're going to talk about snow forecasting and finding powder days in the Jemez and the Land of Enchantment. All right. We got Las Cruces and Taos. Taos in the house. We got Albuquerque. So as Kristen said, yeah, I fell in love with skiing at age 7. My mom and dad are city slickers from New York, and so I was lucky to have friends who were skiers, and also really lucky that Carlos Gilbert Elementary School had a subsidized program to get us up onto the mountain to ski in my backyard. And so I learned at Santa Fe and Taos, but boy, did I discover the gem that is Pajarito, and it is really one of my favorite mountains now of anywhere. I studied weather at Northern Arizona. I ended up going into a different career track. I actually directed nonprofits the last 15 to 20 years. I do consulting for nonprofits that work on everything from environmental justice to social justice. But I always had this love and passion for weather. And OpenSnow, when I lived in Colorado, I used it to chase powder, to chase storms. And I met Joel Gratz, the CEO, online once in Vail. And I said, hey, I'm from New Mexico. I studied meteorology in college. If you ever need a forecaster for New Mexico, hit me up. And so I'd kind of, ping him every year, buzz him. And he's like, no, we're not ready. We're not ready. 8 years later, he said, hey, we're looking for a New Mexico forecaster. And it has just been a dream come true for me. Why? I love New Mexico so much. I love the mountains, just like all of you. I mean, this is my spiritual backyard. I get to write about our mountains and I get to write about snow. This is one of my favorite views of anywhere in New Mexico. Can anyone tell me where this is? Say it a little louder. Bruce's Boulevard at Pajarito, right? How many ski resorts in New Mexico can you see from this vantage point? You can actually see all of them except for Ski Apache, which is down by Ruidoso. But you can see Sandia Peak looking south. And then in this photo, as you can see Red River, Taos, Angel Fire, Sipapu, Ski Santa Fe, and you can also see Santa Fe Baldy and Trucha. So just a beautiful viewpoint. I grew up in Santa Fe, so I love looking at the Jemez, right? And that's kind of the view that I'm used to. But when I'm at Pajarito, it's a really special view looking at the Sangres from the other. So what's on tap tonight for our presentation? Well, we're going to first talk about storm patterns at Pajarito and the Jemez. But we're also going to look at some storm patterns for the rest of New Mexico as well. We're going to talk about our quick snowpack update, like how we're doing right now as of December 16th. We're going to look at the 1 to 2 week forecast. Spoiler alert, we need to go about 3 weeks out maybe to get a little more interesting, but I'm going to walk you through how I would forecast for the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to look at the status of the La Niña or El Nino pattern. What's the latest outlook from NOAA on that? And then hopefully we'll leave time for questions and discussion. Kristen, any other towns represented online? All right. Steamboat in the house. Might be my OpenSnow colleague. Who knows? Welcome. And where are you coming in from? Just joined us in the room. Santa Fe. Okay. Welcome. What is OpenSnow? Real quick straw poll in the room. Anyone use OpenSnow currently? And no worries if you don't. Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. Majority of the room uses it. Thank you so much. If you're online in Zoom, maybe just put a plus sign or a yes or a no in the chat just to kind of get a sense. OpenSnow really is for any winter enthusiast, but it's also really for any weather or summer enthusiast as well. They have a team of amazing meteorologists and data people that have taken weather data from all over the world and been able to capture it into this app and online site. You can literally like push any spot in the world and it'll give you the real-time weather conditions and forecast. And so there's a data and kind of algorithm component to OpenSnow that's fantastic, and the maps. If we have some time, we can walk through some of the map functions. But really the beautiful thing about OpenSnow is the human component. So we have writers like myself in every state and every region. We now have a writer in Europe and South America. And all of our writers are local to that state or region. And so like myself, I bring a love and a passion and a knowledge of our local mountains. And I write a daily forecast from November to April for New Mexico. All right, let's get into the fun part. I'm going to talk about storm patterns for Pajarito and the Jemez and our neck of the woods, right? Southwestern Colorado, New Mexico. So what do I do every morning when I get up, especially when there is a storm coming? I start off with the overall kind of environment and pattern in the atmosphere, North America, United States, Intermountain West, Southwest, New Mexico. I look at moisture content, And the thing that we're going to talk about tonight that I'm going to really hone in on that I look at is what we call lift. We need some type of lift in the atmosphere to create snow. We also need lift in the atmosphere to create rain, really any type of precipitation. And that I think is the most critical here in New Mexico, especially. We really rely on lift in the atmosphere. And so we're going to look at wind directions and we're going to look at the location of the jet stream. That's what I'm paying attention to each morning when I'm looking at storm forecasting. Obviously, we need cold temperatures. Then once I look at the ingredients, moisture, lift, temperature, pattern, then I look at how much it might snow. And then I look at timing because we need to know when to take that day off of work, when to call in that powder flu day, when to drive to Wolf Creek or when to drive to Pajarito. So I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about 3 sources of lift that creates snow. The first one that's most common really anywhere around the world, but really, really important here in New Mexico is orographic lift. And that is when a mountain forces air up. That the lift is literally created by air running into the mountain. It's forced to go up. The air cools and the moisture that's in that air condenses. And if it's cold enough, it falls as a snowflake. If it's not cold enough, it falls as a raindrop. And so the orographic lift is how I would say 80% of the snow that falls into Mexico is created through orographic lift. So looking at this, just for folks in the room, what do you think we're paying attention to when we look at this orographic lift? What factors are important? Wind, and what about the wind? The direction of the wind, and then in relation to the geography, right? Barometric pressure certainly is a factor. And tonight, though, I love this focusing on the wind direction and how it relates to the geography. So let's look at Pajarito, where Pajarito is located. Talk about a complex setup. You have the Jemez Mountains that run kind of at a south to northeast angle. Pajarito's on the eastern side of the Jemez Range. Okay. North of the Jemez, you have the San Juans that are taller, 13,000, 14,000 feet. Wiminutes Wilderness, San Juan Wilderness. And they actually run at a different angle from the northwest angle down to the southeast. And then you have the Sangre de Cristos to the east that go from southwest to northeast. And so really, and then south of the Jemez, you have the Sandia Peak, which is a much smaller range, but still a range. And in between these mountains, you have valleys. You have the Rio Grande Valley. You have the Chama Valley. You have lower valleys in between these mountain ranges. And I'm just going to be honest, Pajarito is kind of difficult. It's a challenging location. And, the scientists that chose that location chose it because it was the best spot in the area for snow. But if they were to pick the best spot in the region for snow, they probably would have gone somewhere else, but it's a little too far. And so it's in our backyard here in Los Alamos. But the reason it's fascinating is that the prevailing storms here in our region is kind of what we call a four corner special. A four corner special is when the storm comes in from the Pacific. And most commonly, that low pressure system is located to our northwest. And we get southwest winds coming through the area. I would say 6 to 7 out of 10 storms meet this profile. It's just our prevailing pattern. And so Pajarito being on that eastern side of the Jemez, if the southwest winds are kind of grazing the Jemez, is that a good setup for Pajarito? Not really. But not really, right? It's kind of like a mixed bag setup. It really depends on the position, depends on where the center of that storm is located. And in Wolf Creek, What's the snowiest mountain in our kind of region? Actually, Colorado, New Mexico, which mountain gets the most snow? Wolf Creek, right? Well, guess what? I said 7 out of 10 storms in this region fit this profile. Wolf Creek is in the ideal location for it. Why? There are no mountain ranges to its southwest blocking it. Literally. I mean, if you've driven that up there, and so you have Pacific moisture coming in, you have southwest winds, you have cold air. The elevation leading up to Wolf Creek, 5,000 to 6,000, 5,000 to 6,000, and then boom, it rises up the San Juan mountain range and just slams into Wolf Creek, and it's just wringing out moisture and snow. It's perfect. You can't design a better setup. Um, what would you say New Mexico ski resort wise gets the most snow? Okay, so Taos. Why do you think that is? So the valley faces the southwest, right? You've driven up, right? There's that beautiful Rio Grande Gorge area, and you're like, huh, it's kind of flat. And then all of a sudden, right, you see Kachina and Wheeler. So there's a Wolf Creek. There's kind of, I call it kind of the mini Wolf Creek effect at Taos. It's complicated though, because you do have the Jemez blocking it. And, you do have the San Juans, like Chama, for example. The Tusas Mountains is the southern part of the San Juans by Chama. And a lot of times storms will get blocked by the Tusas. Like Chama will get 2 feet and Taos won't get much. So they have their own issues. But when we get a good southwest flow coming up that Rio Grande Valley, Taos we call it orographic magic at Taos. Okay, so what's the magic setup for Pajarito? Any guesses in the room? Let's go back to this map. Where is there no major range blocking? I heard south and I heard southeast. Okay. So I heard south and heard southeast. This is really the ideal setup. And guess what? Anyone here for the big 3 to 4 foot snow storm we had in November? Anyone make it on opening day at Pajarito? Oh my God. I'm still salivating from that day. So the ideal setup for Pajarito is when that same storm coming in from the Pacific drops a little more south. The center when the center of that storm is over kind of south central Arizona, New Mexico, that's when I'm like, watch out. This could be a really good setup for Pajarito. Here's the wind direction in the days leading up to the November 5 to 7 storm this year. And you can just see, right, like winds are funneling right through that gap. There's a gap between the Sandias and Ski Santa Fe. There's nothing blocking those winds. They slam into Pajarito, but guess what? They slam into the south side, right? And so there's a common misconception that orographic lift comes up that south side of the range where Pajarito is. So you think, oh, all the snow is going to fall on that south side. That's a misconception. Snow often falls right on the other lip, especially when it's not a really tall range. And so the Pajarito range is what, 10, a little over 10. And so it's like it comes over and it just dumps right on where Pajarito is. And maybe that's why the scientists chose that location. This is an actual radar on the morning of November 4th, 2024. I was sitting at home and I was like, wow, this is a perfect setup. The model is under forecast Pajarito. They kind of had this as like a 1 to 2 foot storm. And models don't do a good job predicting snow for Pajarito. It's interesting. And I often will under forecast. Like I did not forecast 3 to 4 feet for this. But you can see the spin, right? You can see the spin is really right over Albuquerque, maybe. And you have that southeast flow right into Pajarito. So that's orographic lift, and this is the beautiful result. Opening day, I think this was staff or ski patrol nabbing some first lines down Mother. And I got to come in. Anyone know which run this is? Um, I'll give you a hint. I had to hike that day. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Um, so we got to hike up and come off that backside, and just, I mean, who knows if we'll have a better day the rest of the season. Well, we will, but like that was an awesome day. Like if that's February or March, that's the day of the season. Um, I want to talk about the second source of lift for Pajarito, which really this is a really difficult one to forecast as well. So this is when we have a real deep trough in the atmosphere and the jet stream, the main jet stream that's controlling all the weather patterns in the northern hemisphere, literally dips and drives right over New Mexico. That in the upper level of the atmosphere, that jet stream is so powerful that actually that creates lift. Like so, it doesn't matter where there's mountains. Orographic lift is kind of like out, thrown out. It's all about jet stream location. And I love these storms because it's like, oh, everyone's in the game, no matter the wind direction. When you're really localized with wind direction, it's kind of you have a lot of mountains that get you get a few mountains that get a lot of snow and a few that don't get any snow. Whereas with the jet streams overhead, it's an equal opportunity storm. This happened. I went back into the archives and there was a storm January of 2021, January 19th, 2021. And this is an actual radar image from that day. This was the upper level wind forecast. And you can see just like cranking right over to Mexico, upper level wind energy. And then this is the resulting radar. You can just see the like energy in that radar profile, kind of exploding snowfall. And something really interesting happened. That just stalled out. That snow band just stalled because the jet stream was just boom, boom. And Pajarito outperformed every other mountain in this storm cycle. We got 12 inches. Taos got like 10. And it was just the location of the jet stream was set up really nicely. The general wind direction was west-southwest, right? Which isn't the best wind direction, but it doesn't matter because the jet stream overhead. It just where that snow band stalls. And so that's a really good setup for Pajarito. The third best setup, which is pretty rare, but really fun when it happens, is what we call a convergence zone. Anyone familiar in the room with like when a cold front drops into the Rockies, where does that cold air go when it on the east side of the Front Range, like on the east side of the Rocky Mountains? What tends to happen to that cold air? Does it go north, south? Minnesota? So is cold air dense? So cold air drops to the ground, right? And so when that cold air slides down the Front Range, like to the east where Denver is, it just keeps going downhill. And it slides down along the mountains. And a common setup here is that cold air drops down the Raton Pass, I-25 corridor. And it's like, oh, I'm going to keep going. And it goes through the gap. It actually goes through the I-25 gap. And it goes through to Santa Fe. And guess where it goes from there? It crawls to Pajarito. And sometimes if that cold air is strong enough, we'll go over the Sangres and go west into Pajarito and the Jemez. Often, when there's a cold front that's dropping down that eastern side of the Rockies, you also have a setup where that kind of prevailing pattern, we have with southwest winds and Pacific moisture coming in. And when that cold air collides with the western prevailing, it's like when two waves hit and it goes up, and if you get caught in that, it's kind of nasty in the ocean. Well, that's a convergence, and guess what? That's lift. That's lift in the atmosphere. And when that happens and it sets up over our mountains, so So this is an actual radar. This was February 17th, 2022, powder day. We had a convergent zone set up, and that's the profile on radar. Fascinating because that you don't often see that tilt. That um, usually our radar tilt is southwest to northeast, or like what we saw in that jet stream example where it was like west. And so when it's tilted from northwest to southeast, it's usually a convergent zone setup. Really hard to, models do not predict this at all. Like this is where you need to know, this is where the human component comes in handy. I didn't know this when I started 6 years ago. I didn't know these three setups for Pajarito. It took me a lot of trial and error. It took me talking to locals, talking to ski patrol, and then going back and looking at storms like, oh, wow. I only thought it was going to snow 3 or 4 inches. Pajarito got, 2 feet. And you do kind of a go back and study them and you see, okay, these are the setups. So I now know the setups for Pajarito. There's probably others that I haven't learned yet. I want to pause here, Kristen, and see if there are any questions either in the room or in the chat, because we're going to pivot a little bit. Any questions in the room or on chat? I would love to hear about that. I was probably on the bunny hill at Ski Santa Fe, but yeah. Okay. I'm going to look it up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it was one of these three setups. I mean, most likely it was the first setup, like the southeast flow. Yeah. Question here? Okay. So we have, for those online, a gentleman said the 1987 storm must have been one of these setups. And we have another wonderful attendee here. What was your name? Cynthia shoveled snow in that storm in 87. That's awesome. Yeah, we're going to talk about La Nina El Nino near the end of the presentation. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's very much in scope. And actually, I'd love to open that question up maybe to the room and to the Zoom room because there might be some folks who are more knowledgeable than me. Sorry, the question was how does how are we looking into the future as it relates to climate change and how maybe some of these patterns will be affected by that, and probably right snow and skiing and winter overall. And I'd love to, if it's Kristen, if you'll help me remember too, I'd love to come back to that maybe in the Q&A because we might have some experts being in Los Alamos. And I can give you my 2 cents, but that's not an area that I'm an expert in. Yeah. So we're going to pivot a little bit. I guess I think we're doing pretty well on time. So I just want to quickly go back to this map. I love Angel Fire, for example. I love to chase to Angel Fire. It's on the eastern flank of the Sangres. It's our only ski resort really that's on the east side of the Sangres. So what's to the east of Angel Fire? Any big mountain ranges? So what wind direction do you think is best for Angel Fire? When I'm looking at a storm setup, when am I like, Angel Fire? Yeah, so really like southeast, east, northeast. Any of those do well for Angel Fire. Anyone been to Cuchara? It's like a ghost resort that's reopening. It's you can now skin up, but they're actually raising money to, there's a nonprofit that's reopening it. Cuchara is really interesting because it's in like this, it's in a little bowl. It's in the Sangre de Cristos. You come in from Walsenburg, you pass the Spanish Peaks, and then you drive like south into this little bowl. And it's beautiful, but they really only get snow with a northeast wind, even an east and southeast, or when the jet stream's overhead, when wind direction doesn't matter. So Cuchara and we get a lot of northeast like setups um, when storms miss us to the north, but they wrap that wind that wraps around as it's exiting is a northeast wind. And if there's enough moisture, Cuchara does really well. Yeah, it's super fun. Totally recommend it. Yeah. Ooh, I would have to ask Mike. I, yeah, well, yeah, Joel Gratz would love that question. He's the Colorado writer. I'll find out and get it to Kristen. We're gonna pivot to our season snowpack update. Boy, after that November storm, right? I mean, we were at 900% of normal in the Jemez. So, I mean, you all folks who were working on the mountain in 1987. I mean, have we ever had an early storm like that big? I don't know, 3 to 4 feet, early November. So we started off, and this is where the long range outlooks, you have to take them with a grain of salt. In August, we were talking about weak La Niña, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but we were talking about, ooh, maybe not the best season for New Mexico. Yeah, and then we had one of the storms of the century for early November. And so we were at 900%. Unfortunately, it's been tough sledding since then. On November 29th, 146% in the Jemez. Northern Sangre is even less, 100% right at normal. And then, boy, the first few weeks of December have just been a bit brutal. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Not uncommon, December's not usually our snowiest month, but we're now at 54% of normal in the Jemez overall. But let's look at Pajarito. Specifically, Pajarito had, skyrocketed, and then now we've leveled out, and we're just a little below normal. So Pajarito has tons of terrain open. All of our ski resorts in New Mexico are top to bottom skiing. That early storm really set us up nicely. Snowmaking's been great. So we're fine right now, but we will need this pattern to get better. All things considered, though, I think we're in good shape. Yeah. It might have been that 2018. I can't remember exactly. It was a brutal year. It's recent. Like I think it was 2018, maybe 18, 19. Okay, so I'm gonna walk you through how I forecast. Remember I said at the beginning I start with the overall pattern. I look at the overall, and like I look at literally the 30,000 to 50,000 foot level to get a sense of the atmosphere. And the best way to do that is to look at what is happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's where the weather that happens on the ground kind of starts. And so we're looking at, to the question earlier about like barometric pressure, we're looking at what are the patterns of low pressure in the upper levels of the atmosphere? What are the patterns of high pressure? Anyone in the room, just quick, like what does low pressure tend to equate? Does low pressure tend to equate like a sunny bluebird day or more of a stormy day? So low pressure is low pressure is rising air. One of the dynamics of low pressure is rising air. And remember, storms need rising air for energy. And high pressure is descending air, just to put it very simply. And so where there's low pressure spins counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. So any storm, like if you go back to that radar image, right, of that south-southeast flow, it's a counterclockwise spin. High pressure, clockwise spin in the northern hemisphere. So those are I'm just looking at those big trends. So the first half of December, and now pretty much the next 9 days of December have been dominated by a high pressure ridge over the entire western half of the United States. And this happens. It's normal. What's not so normal is when it really digs its heels in and gets stubborn and hangs out for like a month. 3 weeks, 2 weeks. That's when things get a little bit tough, but it happens every season. We ride them out. But the main storm track, so that main jet stream that I mentioned that dictates the weather, has been over Alaska, over British Columbia, Greenland. And it's just been where it's been living. And it's been really hard to break down this ridge. Um, but the atmosphere is fluid and everything eventually changes. And so this high pressure ridge will break down. As far as like, I don't have a storm to forecast with you for the next, normally I would love to look at a storm over the next 5 to 7 days, but we just don't have something in that time frame. And so anything over 5 to 7 days, I can't look at those ingredients yet of that more micro level of like, oh, let's look at moisture, let's look at temperature, let's look at lift, let's look at wind direction. When you get past 7 days, you can speculate, but there's not a lot of confidence in what we find past 5 to 7 days. That being said, I've looked at all the different ensembles. Around December 26, 27, we see high pressure ridge splitting a little bit. We see part of it go over the Pacific Ocean, part of it moves east, and then we see a little wrinkle. When you see that, what we call a trough in weather terms, but when you see the lines dip down and form a little U, that's a marker that I pay attention to for some storminess, maybe squeezing through and descending into the southwest. Now, I don't see strong storm markers like I see over Alaska. So over Alaska, that's like a really strong, deep, low pressure system. Very cold, very stormy, likely. We don't know if there's moisture in there, but we know that that's a really cold, low pressure system. And then you can see the marker for December 26, 27. It's like kind of like a mediocre middle of the road storm, but we don't know the moisture content yet, really. And we don't know too much about this. But what I say is, hey, I think there's a chance for some snow around December 26, 27. Say more than that wouldn't be doing really justice because it's 10 days out, 11 days out. And then that moves through, and then another little dip storm comes through maybe December 28th, 30th. So that's kind of the glass half full to close out the year that there might be 2 chances for snow. And then for fun, I kind of looked out, I looked at all the like comparisons for the first week of January, and there's pretty consistent markers for this map that you're looking at is snowfall for a 7-day period. And so this is the 7-day period from January 1 to January 7th, approximately. And you see like that tilt from the Pacific Northwest down into New Mexico. And that's a positive sign because it means there is not a high pressure ridge blocking. It means that the jet stream maybe is going to be more favorable for us. I'm not seeing deep pinks and reds. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing deep pinks and purples of like lots of snow, but I'm seeing a more favorable pattern. And so let's hope that that continues to be the case for the first week of January. So I'm sorry we don't have like a short-term storm to look at, but that's my short-term forecast. And 1 to 3 week forecast is the next 10 days are going to be really nice if you want to get out and enjoy some sun and mild temperatures. It will cool off quickly at night because of the clear skies. Snowmaking should be fine at most resorts, but it's going to be beautiful weather the next 7 to 10 days for those of us that love sun. Okay, so we're going to get a little nerdy now, but before I do that, any questions online or in the room on what we just talked about in terms of the forecast? Great, so this is The El Nino Southern Oscillation is kind of the fancy term. You'll see ENSO as the acronym. And so when people talk about ENSO, what's the ENSO status? What's the ENSO forecast? That's basically, do we have an El Nino? Do we have a La Nina? Or do we have neither of both? I've yet to see what we call a neutral, and we might see one this year, interestingly. So first, just real quick, again, I'm not a, this isn't my area of expertise. I know enough to help me forecast snow for New Mexico, and every year I write a season forecast preview. I rely heavily on some of our folks on the OpenSnow team and NOAA that write the ENSO blog and the ENSO forecast, who are really the masterminds and scientists studying this. But El Nino and La Nina are very, very important for New Mexico. We are in the part of the country that does historically how we perform in the winter. Snowfall wise does tend to equate or be dictated some by these patterns. I'm just going to say though, you know, like if I were writing, I'd be like star caveat. The November 4 to 7 storm that we talked about this year is a perfect example. In August, when I wrote, in September, when I wrote my season forecast preview, there was a 74% chance of a La Nina, a weak La Nina. Historically, that means maybe 70% of those years, 60%, for example, Pajarito would be below average snowfall. And 30 to 40% we'd be at or above normal. I never, ever, ever would have guessed a 4-foot storm in early November. And so it's really important to understand and give importance to El Nino and La Nina. But in the end, Mother Nature knows, and the atmosphere is completely unpredictable in the long term. The atmosphere works in short term. The forecast that I just showed you for the next 14 days will change. Parts of what I told you will be wrong. Who knows what will happen in early January? We could get another, 3-foot storm. We just don't literally know that far out. So to talk about El Nino and La Nina, there are always exceptions. There are strong La Nina years where we've done really well in New Mexico. So El Nino is when waters over the equatorial Pacific are warmer than normal, above normal. Oceanic temperatures off the coast of South America near the equatorial zone. La Nina is the opposite. It's when that same zone in the equatorial Pacific to the west of South America is colder than normal. And the jet stream behaves differently over time, historically. The trends that history shows is that in a La Nina, the storm track goes north, and you tend to have a wetter winter over the Pacific Northwest. You tend to have a bit drier winter in the Southwest, colder over Canada in the north, and warmer in the south. And there are exceptions to this. In every, we've gone back, we've looked at every La Nina since, weather has been measured, and there are seasons where New Mexico is way above average. But the trend is that way. El Nino, some of our, when I was a kid, some of these like big years with Santa Fe, got a lot of snow. I look back and like, sure enough, yeah, they were El Ninos. But some of the best seasons in the last 6 years were actually a La Nina. So, but El Nino pattern, that storm track tends to run further south and is more favorable. So the Southwest is wetter and colder, whereas the Pacific Northwest and Canada is drier and warmer. As I said, in August, there was a 74% chance of a weak La Nina. The research that I did on weak La Ninas was about a 50-50 for New Mexico. About 50-50 that would be above normal, 50% chance of below normal. Just in November, NOAA updated their prognosis to more of an ENSO neutral, which means no El Nino or no La Nina. Technically, that means that the sea surface temperatures in that equatorial zone fail to exceed 0.5 degrees Celsius below or 0.5 degrees Celsius above during 5 consecutive overlapping 3-month periods. Um, and apparently that's the latest prognosis is for neutral. My colleagues at OpenSnow did some research real quick, and they posted an article on this a few weeks ago. There's only been 4 winters since 1980 with an ENSO neutral. 13-14 season, 90-91 season, the 85-86 season, and the 80-81 season. They posted maps of snowpack for those seasons. Those 4 maps are up on your screen. And it's a mixed bag. The dark blues are above average snowfall. And so I see 2 of those 4 with above average snowfall for New Mexico. One of them was above average in the Jemez, below average in the Sangres. I see 1 map that was pretty dreadful with below average statewide. And then I see 1 map with very below average in the Sangres, but about at average for the Jemez. And so this tells me that we're kind of still in that 50-50, who knows? And that's not a bad place to be. Like, we'll take that, right? We'll definitely take this over strong La Niña. I post updates on this in my daily New Mexico Daily Snow. And so we'll see where NOAA's at. I think they should be posting a new forecast next week, if they haven't already. But so ENSO neutral wouldn't be bad for us in terms of probabilities. We don't really know what's going to happen. We hope the storm track will return and that the favorable January, February, March. So we have some time for questions, discussion. We have a couple in the queue already on climate change. This QR code on your screen, you can download OpenSnow app. My email is julien@opensnow.com. That's JULIEN @OpenSnow. If you're not a user yet, I'm happy to send you a promo code to try it out and see if you like it. And Kristen, let's open it up for question and discussion. So, yeah, so question, any other spots in the Jemez besides Pajarito for chasing powder, backcountry? And I would love to ask the room and online. I have not done backcountry in the Jemez, so I would love to know what folks have. We have in the hand up back here. South side of Redondo. Very limited. Okay. You got to be fast, meaning. Okay, so south facing terrain, and so you got to hit the snow quick before it. Any other backcountry enthusiasts in the Jemez, online or in the room? So Rabbit Hill, you can park on that road by the caldera. Nice. So you have a couple of guys here to pair up with. Oh, you know him. Okay.
Okay, so first question. What is a backdoor cold front?
Ooh, yeah, good question. Backdoor cold front is the setup we looked at earlier. Whoops. This is a backdoor cold front on your screen right now. Yeah, meteorologists kind of came up with that term, I guess, because like the prevailing winds are from what direction? West, right? So most weather in the United States is west to east. So the front door, the west. But backdoor cold fronts are super common in New Mexico. I love reading the Albuquerque National Weather Service daily discussion. And it's like amazing how often they use that term, backdoor cold front. Why? Well, because of what I talked about. Cold air slides down the Front Range, and it loves to just slide right through that I-25 corridor and um, seep through the gap between the Sandias and the Sangres, or slam into the eastern. We get eastern upslope is another term that you hear a lot. Eastern upslope is basically that backdoor cold front slamming into the eastern side of the Sangres. Or God, I love that setup when it slams into the Sandias and you get that low hanging cloud and fog, and sometimes it like rolls up over the Sandias. Um, I've heard some people call that like a smothered burrito cloud.
We have a few best setup questions.
Okay.
So first one is, what is the best weather setup for Sipapu?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. I actually was just talking to JP. JP's the general manager at Sipapu. Great guy, by the way. Studied ski resort management at Fort Lewis. Who knew that there's a ski resort management degree at Fort Lewis? Grew up skiing purgatory and loves Sipapu. JP drives the snowcat. He opens the the ski rental. I mean, he does everything. Measures the snow religiously at 5 a.m. Keeps a log going back 15 years, and he knows what the setups for Sipapu. Yeah, Sipapu is kind of Sipapu. Anyone been there in the room? So a lot of hands up, and I'm sure folks online. What stands out to you about Sipapu when you go there? What makes it a little bit different than other mountains? Kind of hidden in that little valley, right? And it doesn't go to the top. So it's one of our lower elevation mountains. Okay? So Taos gets more snow because it's higher, colder, more orographic lift. Sipapu is in a valley, and there's kind of embedded in the middle of the Sangres, and there's kind of mountains all around it. And and this is where having a local person like JP is really handy. So JP, because I'm like, JP, Sipapu wasn't supposed to get any snow. Southeast wind is bad. Like you all are blocked to the south and southeast, and you just got a foot of snow. And he's like, yeah, those mountain ranges to our south are really low. Like he's like the ridge, but around us, like if we had a topo map, I could pull it up. The part of the Sangres that are south and east of Sipapu are just not really tall, and so if the storm is relatively strong, apparently those winds do just fine getting to Sipapu with a southeast wind. But their best setup, they're like, if Pajarito, the best setup is a south or southeast. Sipapu's magic is a northwest flow. Basically, JP says if I see winds coming from Chama and there's moisture, I know we're going to get snow. So northwest flow for Sipapu is the setup there. Not a common setup for New Mexico. Mm, it's not common, but common enough that they do pretty well every year. Oh, and by the way, being in a valley, um, what do you know about temperatures? When you think of a valley, what do you think about temperatures? Cold, right? When you go camping up in the wilderness and you like, oh yeah, that valley looks great, and then in the middle of the night you're like, damn, um, I'm freezing. So cold air is dense, right? Heavy. It drops into the valley. Sipapu, have you ever noticed they're the first to open usually in New Mexico? Every year. And yet they're the lowest elevation. Why do you think they can open first? So they get an inversion. JP actually sent me like a 2-page write-up on their snowmaking, and I post it every year. They rely on that inversion in October. Ski Santa Fe is not making snow. Taos isn't making snow. Sipapu makes snow, and they're usually the first to open because they get that really cold valley air, and then they can make snow earlier. I love that. Any other setup questions?
Yes. Best setup for Red River.
Red River is like next on my list to study up, to be honest. They're a bit of an enigma for me. Um, Anyone been to Red River and can describe where they are geographically? North of Taos. You drive up that like the Molly Benham mine and you drive up the valley. Again, lower elevation mountain. Um, Kind of nestled there on the western side of the Sangres. But unlike Taos, Taos is right on like Taos is literally the first like there's no mountain to the west of Taos. Whereas Red River is kind of nestled in there a little bit like Sipapu. So there is some they get a little bit of rain shadow from west wind, southwest. Southwest wind is not great for Red River. They're blocked by Taos. Um, Northwest wind is also good for Red River because there isn't anything too significant blocking to their northwest. I've seen a north wind, I've seen a northeast wind do pretty well for Red River. Um, they're tough to forecast. For some, they're a bit of an enigma for me, to be honest. I need my like Red River JP to school me up. But in my 6 years, the best snow I've seen there is um, like a northwest, a north, or a northeast wind. And when that jet stream is overhead, everyone gets it, right? Are any of those places where moisture comes in? Yeah. So I mean, um, Baja, so the subtropical moisture, which would be coming from the Baja area. Subtropical meaning it's like warmer. That's the best for us because it's the closest. Um, we go to this slide that I had for Wolf Creek, like um, our closest source of moisture is the Baja part of the Pacific. But it's guess what? That's warmer temperatures as well. And so you need that cold air from the north to combine with the subtropical moisture from the Pacific. We've all had those days, right, where you go out and it snows a foot or two, but it's like that really wet, dense snow, and it's like it's not the type of powder that we dream of, and that's usually when there's a ton of moisture from subtropics, but there isn't that cold air mixed with it for that best setup. Um, and so if there's a good trough in the jet stream coming from the Pacific Northwest, where that moisture is coming plus the cold air that's from the north, then that is a more preferable setup, but it's just not the more common for us. Yeah. Maybe we have time for one or two more. Wow, that's a great. If I could build a new ski resort in New Mexico, where would I build it? Anyone in the room or on Zoom want to answer that? I mean, I often see like the west side of the Jemez with that prevailing southwest setup. The west side of the Jemez, I don't know, but I think like what's the San Pedro Wilderness? Um, the San Pedro Wilderness. We went backpacking there a couple of summers ago. I've always wanted to know like how they do snow wise. But it's just flat. It's really flat over there. The Tusas Mountains near Chama get a lot of snow. Um, I don't know. Anyone else have other answers? Yeah. That'd be probably the Tusas near Chama. Yeah. And
So
then we ran out of time maybe for the climate change question, but
one more from online, which
okay.
is there avalanche danger in Chuchara?
Is there avalanche danger in Cuchara? Um, I talked to the Cuchara man, like the board director of their nonprofit who goes up like every storm cycle. He said that the terrain that they ski, there's little to no avalanche danger. That being said, he always wears a beacon and always goes out with avalanche terrain and gear. There is a there's a bowl. There is a bowl like up in the higher elevations that they don't ski because of blowdowns. There's a ton of blowdown trees that haven't been removed, and so no one goes over there. But he said that is avalanche terrain. But consider Cuchara backcountry, and so everywhere is potentially an avalanche risk, or falling into a tree well, or getting immersed in deep snow, are all reasons to carry equipment. But yeah, very low avalanche risk at Cuchara. Um, I wrote a Kuchara trip report. If you just Google Julien Ross, OpenSnow, Kuchara trip report, it'll come up. I wrote that 2 years ago, and you can check out the terrain there. Yeah, we'll have to do another. We should do another get together on climate change and winter in New Mexico, because I think I know in Los Alamos there are people that can really educate us about that. At the labs and elsewhere. Um, but Kristen, any other questions or final?
No more questions from online. There is, this is just an aside, but there is a really, I forget his name, a research scientist in Toronto who is doing a lot of climate change research um, focused on snowpack. And I would suggest looking for papers by him. I can find his name. Okay, so I think that's wrapping up the program then. So thank you so much, Jillian, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. And thank you to everyone that joined us online and in person. What a great audience, what great information. I hope you take something away from this, and I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.